Guys, what's going on? This is Ash here coming at you today in Raid Shadow Legends. Hopefully you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to talk about all 25 champions that anybody can get inside this game. So really farmable campaign champions, daily log and reward champions, and the starting champions. But rather than just talk about them, right, because again there's 25 that I identified as champions worth taking a look at, we're going to talk about, you know, if I was approaching this game during my first year or so, which champions would I recommend you guys build? Where should you be putting your focus on pertaining to where you actually are in the game, like the advancement of your account overall? So let's go ahead and start with the campaign champions, and let's just go through and so we can talk about, so you guys can see where you access and where you're able to farm these champions. The nice thing about these campaign champions is that you can book them all up just using duplicates. So farming duplicates on any of these levels, you can, you know, the rare champions are more rare drops, but you can really unlock any of these champions, and they're easy to build up. And when I started this game, I think just like my first inclination was, dude, they're campaign champions. They probably all suck, you know? And the truth is they just don't, especially in the early and the mid game. So the first, I don't know, 6 months, depending on obviously if you spend money on this game or so, you can really progress with a lot of these champions. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be starting a free-to-play account here on the channel, and I tend to use a lot of the champions we're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and talk about them. There's a lot of champions to get to. Again, this is not going to be an in-depth guide on any of these champions, really talking about why you would consider investing in them. So let's just start with Valkyrie, guys. She's really cool because of her A2 here. Energizing Presence increases the duration of all buffs on all your allies, and while at the same time decrease the duration of all debuffs by 1 turn. And oftentimes that's enough to get those debuffs fully removed on a 3-turn cooldown. Also places the weak version of increase attack buff on all allies for 2 turns, all on a 3-turn cooldown. This Energizing Presence ability is going to help you out a lot. You know, before you get a real true cleanser on your team, this is a nice ability to have, and the increased attack is nice to kind of addition to this already pretty solid skill. Now Protect, it gets even better, right? On a 5-turn cooldown, places a shield buff on all allies for 2 turns. The value of the shield depends on this champion's level, heals each ally according to the number of buffs they are currently under. So you're getting a heal and a shield. So a farmable champion with a 2-turn shield is really valuable, and then add that to the Energizing Presence. She's definitely a champion worth considering. In my opinion, Valerie is really good. A lot of people lean on her in this game, especially again in the early game. Next up is going to be, I don't love any champions in Stage 2 or Stage 3, but moving on to Stage 4, well, I do love Spirit Host. We talk about debuff cleansers, and check it out. We get the increased attack buff on all allies, this time the strong version on a 3-turn cooldown, and then on the A3, removes all debuffs on all allies, and then places a block debuffs buff on all allies for 1 turn. It's a really good ability, guys. Gonna help you out in dungeons, in campaign, Dragon's Lair, removing all those poisons. However, the downside is it's on a 5-turn cooldown once you upgrade it. So it's not as reliable as, say, a Reliquary Tender, a Void rare champion. But Spirit Host or in the arena, using her in either the arena or dungeons, it's gonna help you out to have that cleanse, and of course, again, the increased attack. She also has speed in all battles by 10%, which is a really valuable aura in the early game. Spirit Host, in my opinion, is really an early game champion, a champion that you can invest in, will help you out in the first few months of your raid kind of journey, but she doesn't scale as well as some of the other champions we're going to talk about. Another champion that I really like is Greybeard. So Greybeard has a freeze. He's a CC type champion. Let's talk about his A1 first. Has a 50, make it 75, actually make it 70%, my bad, chance at placing a provoke for 1 turn on his A1. It's a really high percentage to land a provoke, even for a rare champion, or even for an epic champion, that's a high percentage on an A1. Attacks all enemies, and then has a 40% chance of placing a freeze debuff for 1 turn. So you're getting some really solid CC between the provoke on the A1 and a freeze on the A2. And what's best is you can build him based on defense. So you build him out to be a defensive juggernaut. He's really a great first tank for your teams. He can help you out tremendously in dungeons, in campaign as well. He also has a shield buff on this champion for 2 turns, and has an 80% chance of placing a counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns. That can be booked up to 100. And the value of the shield is proportional to defense. So not only is he landing those provokes, you're building him with a lot of defense, but he's also going to counterattack and land even more provokes because of the consistency and the synergy between his A1 and his A3. Really solid champion. Increase ally defense in dungeons by 30%. This is why Greybeard, for me, has more mid-game viability than any champion we've talked about so far in this video. He's a really, really underrated champion because ally defense in dungeons by 30% is really, really good. It's going to make a big impact for you in terms of staying alive. So not only is he a tank, but again, he's going to have that great aura to kind of lend to your dungeon teams. Next up, we're going to go to Stage 6. Nobody I love in Stage 5. Stage 6, we have Eris. So Eris is an early to mid-game champion. She has an extra turn granted if the target is killed on bullseye. We'll come back to that in a moment. And then she removes one random debuff from all allies and has a 100% chance of placing a 30% strong version increased speed on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. So until you get Apothecary, this is going to be a great option to have the strong version on a 3-turn of increased speed. Also removes 1 debuff from all allies. That's really solid in addition to. Early game players oftentimes don't recognize the value in debuff cleansers on their team. So Eris is a great option in that regard. And that increased speed, another one, increased speed based on skills, not artifacts, actually goes off of their total speed after artifacts. So their base speed plus their artifact speed plus their Great Hall speed all kind of adds up, and that's what the 30% is based off of. So it's a really good buff to have. And then she has speed in dungeons by 16%. So another decent aura on Eris. Man, as I look at these champions again, it's just like they're solid and they're totally farmable for everybody. Next is going to be nobody in Stage 7 that I love, but in Stage 8, there's another early game option. I wouldn't say he scales as well as Greybeard, for example, but another defense-based champion in Templar. Templar is a guy who I kind of just didn't recognize as being anything worth building, but he's actually not that bad. He has decreased speed, and his damage, again, is based off defense, which makes that any champion whose damage is based off defense are really easy to build, right? Because essentially, you don't have to worry about keeping them alive, because you just want them with a lot of defense, so they'll deal a lot of damage, you know? So it's easy to build those champions. Crit rate, defense. You're looking good, right? 4 times at random. Each hit has a 50% chance when booked of placing a provoke for 1 turn. Places a block damage buff on this champion for 1 turn. So not only a 3-turn, not AoE, but 4-time at random provoke for some CC, but also he has a block damage for a whole turn, which is going to eat up all the damage from that first turn of provoke. And then his passive is attacks with this champion's default skill whenever an enemy places a debuff on this champion. So that goes right back into landing more decreased speeds, and he has resist in arena battles, kind of whatever on the aura. But Templar is not an awful champion. Again, I don't like him as much as Greybeard, but he's an option for you guys. The Deadlands probably the best place to farm in the game because it has 2 of my favorite champions who are really viable in the early, the mid, and even into the early late game, and that is War Maiden. She hits hard, but more importantly, on her A3, attacks all enemies, and then has a 100% chance of landing a decreased defense for 2 turns. That's a really, really incredible ability. No other rare champion has it on this consistency on a 3-turn AoE attack with 100% land, so really, really valuable. War Maiden should be a focus of almost everybody who's starting out an account in Raid Shadow Legends, assuming you're not going to drop like $2,000 on day 1, right? Shield Guard is really solid too, man. In case you missed my video on Shield Guard, I'll link it in the description below for you guys, but you got to check it out, man. He can solo like a beast. He's insane. You put him in lifesteal gear. His damage, again, is based off of defense. Check out his A2. Attacks all enemies on a 2-turn cooldown. When booked, easy to book. He's an uncommon champion. Fills his champion's turn meter by 20% on each critical hit. So basically, if you land 5 critical hits, boom, he's back at full turn meter. He does his A1, and he's right back into his A2. Removes 1 debuff from this champion each turn as his passive. Okay, pretty cool. Shield Guard is a beast. So definitely a champion worth looking at. Now we go to Stage 10, and we see in Godfrey's Crossing, we see not Muckstalker. Actually, we see another uncommon champion, Saurus. Saurus is unique because Saurus and stun can really make a difference on your account. He has 2 abilities, but they're both AoEs. Wind Cutter attacks all enemies, and is on his A2, Fire Wave attacks all enemies 2 times. So you put this dude in a stun set, and you get 2 times 18% chance on his A2 of landing a stun, and then you have the 18% chance of landing a stun on his A1, and you don't have to worry about building him with any accuracy, because all that stun's coming from an artifact set, which does not require accuracy. It's a solid champion to invest in, and he does pretty decent damage, too, for an uncommon champion. So that is Saurus. On stage 11, we have, I just can't believe going through these champions how many decent options there are. Executioner is early to mid-game champion. Saurus is early to mid as well. We have a stun on the A1, and then his A2. Tumult attacks all enemies, decrease the turn meter by 20%, has a 75% chance of placing a decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. That's really solid. You want to build him with more attack than defense, but, you know, having extra defense is always good. But build him with accuracy, because this turn meter depletion is really valuable, but it is based off of accuracy, so make sure you have that. So not only are you doing a pretty decent AoE attack on a 3-turn cooldown when booked, but also you have the decreased turn meter, which is solid, and the decreased speed. Decreased turn meter and decreased speed on the same AoE ability on a 3-turn cooldown is a really valuable skill to kind of have in your arsenal. He also has an increased defense and a counterattack on this champion for 3 turns, a pretty decent kind of completion to his kit. Also has ally defense in all battles by 17%. So early game, you can run him in anywhere inside the entire game, even clan boss if you want a defensive or a champion. However, in clan boss, you know, you're not going to be getting the decreased speed or the turn meter or the stun. However, you will have that nice kind of counterattack. And with War Master counterattack with the defensive aura in the early game, he's a decent clan boss option. You can build him to be you know, defensive based as well. So last but not least, for the campaign at least, not even halfway through the video yet, we have Diabolus, who I've done a whole guide on, guys. She's really solid on her A2. She has an AoE attack and a strong version of increased speed on a 3-turn cooldown. On her A3, fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%, decrease the turn meter of all enemies by 15% on a 4-turn cooldown on positive charge. Her miniature version of Lysandra's Energize ability. This is a really good ability, guys. Again, early players in this game don't fully recognize the value of turn meter manipulation and turn meter fill for your allies and depletion for the enemies. So Diabolus is great, and she has the speed. So she's all about speed. She's a fast champion too at 105 base speed. So those are my favorite the champions to kind of farm in the campaign. If I was going to start over, which I am soon, I would probably invest in terms of priorities. I would definitely go with War Maiden and Shield Guard. I'd probably also add Diabolus to that team. I think that pairing Diabolus and Executioner together is valuable. And then I would go, so Diabolus, Executioner, if I had to make an only campaign team. And then I might go Saurus in a stun set if I could farm the gear, you know, assuming I could get it. But I feel like that would be ultimate CC. You'd have Diabolus with turn meter, you have Executioner with turn meter in a stun, and then you have a stun set on Saurus as well. You have Shield Guard. I think we need a little bit more support, as much as that's tempting. I might go Greybeard on there to land those provokes as well, to kind of round out that team. And if I needed some healage too, I would consider adding Valerie to that squad too. So those are my favorite champions, and that's kind of where I would focus alongside Kale, who I would choose as starting champion. So quickly, let's talk about the starting champions in this game. Obviously, Kale, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the starters because you guys are probably already acquainted with them. I think Kale is head and shoulders better than the other 3, just my personal opinion. People tend to agree. The other 3 are not bad, but Kale is really good. You can use him in the early end game, and the other champions don't scale quite that far, and he just deals a ton of damage with his poisons to bosses, mainly clan boss and dragon. So again, he has a solid AoE on the A2 with the turn meter fill, and then he has a strong version of poison on disintegrate, his A3. I mean, that's what makes him so good. He also has a weak version of poison on his A1. All of the starters have HP in all battles, so if you don't have an aura champion, you can always run them anywhere inside the game. The other starting champions are, of course, Galik. Galik is... Probably my third favorite, and we'll get to my second next, but he has an AoE attack with the increased speed on himself on the A2 on Hellraiser. It hits pretty hard too, some of the best rare multipliers on Galik's kit, and then Curse Blade 4 times at random with the weak version of decreased defense. And then he has a 2-time hitter on his A1, so that's Galik. And then my least favorite, personally, not that she's bad, excuse me, is Elhane. I always say Elhane, my bad. Elhane. Elhane is pretty cool. She's known for her AoE on the A2. Basically attack one enemy, then all enemies. And then on the A3, attacks all enemies 2 times on the Valley of Death ability. So she's hitting a lot. She's very fast at 107. I do believe she has the lowest base defense at 837 of all the starters. But she also has, I believe, the most HP. Could be wrong on that, but you guys can compare if you want to. She's not a bad champion at all, especially for a starter champion. You can't really go wrong with her. If I had a Kale and I pulled it in Elhane, I would go ahead and definitely, move in that direction. But, that's who I would kind of focus on. Kale, obviously, first. And then I'm actually a big fan. And again, here, guys, I'm kind of comparing the starters. But, I'm a big fan of Aethel, actually. She doesn't get a lot of love. But Aethel has a really cool ability in Divine Blades. On her A3, Higher Blessing. And this makes her really right up there with Kale in the best campaign farmer for the early game, right? And she has an increased attack on this champion for 2 turns, increased defense on this champion for 2 turns if the HP is less than 50%. And all of that, a new player looks at that and they go, who cares, kind of, just on herself, not on allies, who cares? Well, the important thing here is really gains an extra turn. And the value of gaining an extra turn is really, that's the most important part of this ability, right? Because it's going to decrease the cooldown of her other skills by virtue of gaining an extra turn. So Divine Blades is going to go from a 3-turn cooldown, which is a pretty hard-hitting ability, to a 2-turn because that grants that extra turn. So it makes her more consistent with strong AoE attacks. And that's why Aethel is my second favorite of the starting champions. So those are the 4 starters. Now let's talk about the daily log and reward champions. And I just want to go ahead and start with my favorite champion in today's video. And you don't get her till, a couple hundred days inside the game, or 180. Still of the Drakes, man. What can I say about this champion? What that I haven't said already on the channel? She is so, if you can play long enough to get her, your account will be dramatically changed, whether you're a spender or a non-spender. She's the best thing that Plarium's ever done, in my opinion, in terms of adding champions to the game, especially accessible free champions. She's going to help you out tremendously in Faction Wars and pretty much every dungeon as well. She has an AoE stun that's incredibly reliable. You do have to book her out, so that's tough to get legendary books, but she is worth it. She's worth the very hard and scarce legendary books that you can get inside this game. Her damage is based off defense. She has a pretty high base defense. She has this reliable stun here, 2-time hitter. Each hit, so 2 chances to land that stun on all enemies, and each one has an independent 35% chance of landing. You put Fearsome Presence, is going to increase that by 5% as well to 40-40. Put her in a stun set on top of that, going to get an additional 18 or 23%. It's really solid. Then she has the revival on the A1. So, and then she has this cool passive, heals all allies 10% of their max HP at the start of every turn. Also has increased speed, dude. She is great. One of my favorite champions inside the entire game, no doubt about it. Next up is High Katoon. She's one of the first, or second rather, champions that you get daily login rewards. And just like Syl the Drakes being an endgame champion, High Katoon's going to be able to scale you into the endgame as well. I would say she's obviously viable early game. A lot of people, you unlock her, you're usually building her out unless you're a huge spender in this game. On the A2, she has fills the turn meter of all allies by 15% and places a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown, and then an AoE attack that has a 75% chance when booked of decreasing the turn meter by 15% on all enemies. So again, that turn meter is so valuable, and sticking with the theme of speed, increase ally speed in all battles by 19% is a perfect addition to her kit on that aura. So really, really good champion. Any other daily login rewards here? I do not think so. Let's go on to, I think, my least favorite daily login reward, and that would be a guy who personally, I don't think you should even bother leveling him up. Even when you get him, I couldn't be a bigger hater of Lordly Legionary, guys. A lot of people say he's a Fire Knight specialist. He has a shot if the target is under 50% heal reduction, of placing an extra hit. If it's under 100% heal reduction, of placing 4 hits. Dude, just having a chance for 4 hits on an A1 is not enough in my opinion, even with the reflect, even with the continuous heal. This reflect is on a 4-turn cooldown, man. Fellhounds is on a 2-turn cooldown, you know, and he's an epic. I just am not a fan of Lordly Legionary at all. I think he's a trash champion. You can let me know if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I gotta be honest with you guys. I don't think he's even good to build out for Fire Knight, especially because his affinity. Magic Fire Knight 20, once you get there, you know, in the mid to the early end game, once you're able to complete Fire Knight 20, he's not even going to be always landing a critical hit, man, because he's magic versus force affinity. So Lordly Legionary is a trash champion. Again, I will take the shot at him. So I'm just not a fan of him at all. Let's talk about the last champion you guys get. Is Vizix the Unbowed. A lot of people are down on this champion. A lot of people are very disappointed. She has a ton of defense. 1476, very high on defense. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each has an 80% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter. That can be built up to 100. And fills this champion's turn meter equal to the amount the target loses. Damage is based off defense. This is a great A1, guys. On the A2, attacks all enemies. Has a 100% chance when invoked of placing a decreased speed for 2 turns, and a shield buff on this champion equal to 20% of their max HP for 2 turns. Again, damage is based off of defense with the decreased speed. Sinister Allies is not a bad ability. It's a good ability. Single combat, places a provoke debuff on the target for 1 turn, also places an ally protect on all allies except this champion for 2 turns, on a 3-turn cooldown. You know, ideally the provoke would be on an AoE, then she would be really strong and solid. It's only 1 target, which kind of sucks. It really sucks. But you do get Ally Protect, which is a great buff to have in this game, and it's on a 3-turn cooldown. So I think overall, I think that she is underrated. She's not one of the best legendaries in the game, but I actually think she's a solid champion, especially in Faction Crypts because of this aura. 37% defense in Faction Crypts. So I think that she's worth building if you have not cleared Dark Elves 21 inside Faction Crypts, or if you're struggling with progression anywhere. So, you know, I differ from public opinion, I guess, on that one. Let's see, anybody else here? We might come back to it. I'm just kind of going haphazardly all over the place here. Lizardmen, we have... the first dude you get is not Flinger, not Slasher, not Metal Sharper is actually a solid champion. Am I in rares here? Yes, I'm in rares. That's why I couldn't find my boy Jizzo. My bad. So Jizzo is a decent champion. He's one of the first guys that you get. His damage is based off defense. On his A2, shield buff for 3 turns and a counterattack for 2 turns on 1 ally. Then grants an extra turn, and the value of shield is proportional to his defense. That's not a bad ability, again, with the extra turn having more value in that skill. Attacks 1 enemy, has an 80% chance, 100% chance of placing a provoke for 2 turns, and a continuous heal buff on this champion for 2 turns. I think all said and done, Jizzo's not the worst champion in the world. However, I am not a huge fan. He has a really high base defense, or I shouldn't say really high, but he has a solid base defense at almost 1400, kind of the same as Syl the Drakes. But still, man, he's no Syl the Drakes, you know? He has an attack in all battles, which is okay to have, but I'm just not a huge fan of Jizzo unless you're in the very early game, but I personally would not invest in him. Again, not trash, but I just don't think, I think you can get better options than him pretty quickly. So I wouldn't build Lordly, I wouldn't build Jizzo if I was going to go through the game again. Next one, might as well cover all kind of, not Zargala, my bad. That'd be cool if we got Zargala. It's actually Shaman. Shaman is another kind of one of those weird champions that, yeah, she's great in the early game. You have increased crit rate on all allies for 2 turns. We have Revive on the A3 on a 5-turn cooldown. It's nice to get a Reviver in this game, but eventually you're going to start unlocking them, you know? So is it worth building her just to have a 5-turn Revival? I wouldn't. You know, if she had a defense in all battles or something by 23%, I would, or 20%, I probably would. But her aura's not that great. Her base stats are solid. Her speed is solid. But personally, even though she's not trash, I mean, Her ability, attack one enemy with increased crit rate on all allies. It's not awful on a 3-turn cooldown to have the increased crit rate, but still not the greatest. She doesn't do much other than reviving, you know? So that's kind of the reason I would not personally build her out, even if I was free to play, unless I really, really, really wanted to revive her and I was just unlucky or something and I never pulled one. So that is her. Let's talk about Undead Horde, Dark Elhane. Dark Elhane, you guys know, I think she's viable up until the end game, right? So she is probably, what, our 3rd or 4th champion that we talked about so far, maybe 5th, that is viable in the end game. Especially when we talk about Dark Elhane, she's really a specialist in my eyes for Ice Golem. You guys need to know that if you're struggling in Ice Golem, Dark Elhane is one of the best nukers, if not the best nuker out there, non-legendary. On the A2, Death's Majesty hits very hard. Increase attack buff on this champion for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown, then attacks all enemies. Also has a 75% chance of placing a decreased speed. Decreased speed is great. Hard-hitting ability, increase attack on herself. Very, very good ability, but the reason, and she has decreased target's max HP by 30% of the damage inflicted on the A1. Also a hard-hitting ability. Great multipliers on Dark Elhane. Fills this champion's turn meter by 25% and instantly activates her hard-hitting A2. Death's Majesty, whenever this champion or an ally receives a freeze debuff. Man, that's insane. You guys can read through the Veins of Ice too. She has this kind of unique, weird ability where she removes freeze and puts buffs on her instead. But man, every time an ally is frozen by the Ice Golem, boom, we go in there with Death's Majesty. You know, that's a hard-hitting ability, and it's just one attack after another, after another, after another. She's a really good champion for Ice Golem. She's a good nuker everywhere else too, but especially Ice Golem. Dark Aethel is another login reward champion. I am not a fan of Dark Aethel. I know some of my viewers are, so again, this is an opinion-based video. I would not invest in her. She has a decreased speed on her A2 on a 4-turn cooldown, and on the A3, an AoE attack, an increased speed on this champion for 3 turns if the attack kills 4 or more enemies. Heals if it kills 6 or more enemies. Extra turn if the attack kills 10 or more enemies. So she's meant to be kind of a spider specialist. I think there are way better options out there. She has an ally attack in all battles by 20%. Again, a lot of people disagree with me and like Dark Aethel in the mid game, basically when you unlock her. Me personally, I think that by the time you unlock her, you probably have better options, but I've just never been a huge fan of Dark Aethel. Again, I've seen her on some like sleeper lists, so, you know, my opinion. All right, who haven't I talked about here? We have not talked about Taenix Hateflower. I think she's Demon. So Taenix Hateflower, I hated her in the beginning, you know, when she was released. I did a guide on her, and I don't think I crapped on her like, yeah, I think I did. I didn't like her, but she was pivotal for me to clear Demon Spawn without, at the time, having Duchess on my team. This was like my only heal that I had. Attacks 2 times at random, heals all allies by 3% of this champion's HP with with each hit on targets under decreased speed. Dude, I hate the qualifier there. 3% of this target's max HP on every hit would be amazing, but it's 2 times. So it's a 6% heal, right? Because with each hit, 6% heal each times 3. So that is valuable, and she has the decreased speed on all targets. Even though it's only targeting 1, make sure you're targeting, you know, not a Spirit Affinity champion. You're landing that debuff, and boom, decreased speed on all enemies. So really, really solid to have that for 2 turns if it's critical. So she's landing the decreased speed. She decreases the damage all allies receive by 5%. And she'll receive the damage instead, so it's nice to have that there as well. It's not an OP passive. Overall, she's like a C- champion in my opinion, but if you really need a healer, think Faction Wars. She's there for you. Taenix Hateflower. I actually, again, was pleasantly surprised with this champion. This is one of the new. Wow, he looks so cool, man. I haven't looked at him in my own game yet. Wow, he's one of the new Doom Tower champions. Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked here. Who haven't I talked about, guys? I have not talked about Grush. Grush the Mangler is a really good champion. He is viable. I guess Taenix is viable endgame, but very, very niche. Endgame Faction Wars. Grush is a viable in a lot of areas endgame. Another endgame viable champion who everybody eventually gets for free. He has a chance of landing the leech debuff on all targets for 2 turns before attacking, on the target, excuse me, for 2 turns before attacking. Really solid. A defense-based champion who has a leech, immediately viable for clan boss. Attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance of placing a decreased attack and a decreased crit damage debuff for 2 turns. On a 4-turn cooldown, Bone Breaker Stomp ability is good. This is totally mitigating damage. Or I shouldn't say totally. This is doing a really great job at mitigating damage. 30% crit damage and cutting their attack in half. Really solid debuff to have. And then it gets better. It attacks all enemies, so it's an AoE attack, and places a 15%, which is a strong version of continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. Places an additional 7.5 continuous heal buff on all allies for 1 turn if at least 1 enemy is hit with a critical hit. So you're getting a strong and a weak version of continuous heal for 2 turns in 1 turn. That's a lot of healing on an AoE attack. Crush the Mangler is a really good champion, and then he has the defense and fashion crypts as well. So I think I've covered, no, I'm missing one. I am missing one, and it is a Skinwalker. So let me know if you like this video, by the way, guys. Covering basically everybody that you can get in this game for free, or my favorites, I should say. Yaga the Insatiable, dude. Poor Yaga. Everybody always forgets about Yaga, man. Some people love him, some people hate him. I am somewhere in the middle. Attacks 1 champion, has a 50% chance of placing the strong version of poison for 2 turns. To me, this is the best part of his kit. So put him on a counterattack team, put him with a counterattacker, and you're landing poisons at a pretty high percentage every time he attacks. Nice to have. And then as A2 attacks 1 enemy 2 times, each hit has a 75% chance of placing a poison debuff for 2 turns, and then attacks 1 enemy, damage increases by 25% against targets under poison debuffs. So that's on a 4-turn cooldown. So he's all about poison. However, you know, attacks 1 enemy, attacks 1 enemy. It's all single target damage. He's good for early game to maybe early mid-game clan boss, and decent in, I guess he's decent in Dragon. He has the appropriate affinity too for Dragon 20 if you're struggling there. But still, by the time you get to, you know, Dragon 20, you're going to have better options than Yaga the Insatiable. When I'm redoing this game, I'm personally not going to be investing in building Yaga the Insatiable. Doesn't mean he's a trash champion. I just don't think, I think there's better out there. I would rather just run Kale and invest in Kale as my main poisoner, and then wait till I get in a champion like a Cult Brawler or something to kind of pair with him. So there it goes, guys. That is it. I'm just looking one more time to make sure I got everybody. And yeah, I did. That's 25 champions that we reviewed in one video. Thank you so much for watching until the end. And as always, take care, guys.